joining us on YouTube or if you're joining us live, thank you so much for coming. Today we have another one of our speaker series events, and we are hearing from Harsh Goyal, former UT student and current software engineer at Google. I'm going to just be asking him a quick Q&A, sort of like we've done for the other speakers, and then at the end there will be time for you to ask any questions that you might have for yourself. If you want to ask any questions afterwards, as usual, please feel free to message me through Slack, and I will forward those questions straight to Harsh on your behalf. So without further ado, Harsh, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself for our audience tonight?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ansh, for inviting me. So I was an undergraduate student at UT myself a year and a half ago. About a year ago, I started working at Google as a software engineer in the search division. Right now, I work sort of both on things that you see on the search results page itself, but also on Discover, which is the thing you see when you open the Google app. You see this list of articles without even searching for anything. Yeah.
Cool. Can you talk more about let's just jump right in. Can you talk more about your work you're doing for Search and Discover?
Sure. So let's see. So there's a lot of different kinds of content on the web, right? So sometimes when you're searching for something, you just want like maybe the most relevant result to your query. Let's say you're searching for something like weather. You're looking for an answer. That's something that search has always been really good at. There's also another class of queries where maybe you're looking for inspiration, or you're looking for more like magazine-like content. You just want some really high quality websites that you want to look at. So you can imagine that's the sort of content that also shows up in Discover, where people want news, but they also want just like high quality content about hobbies and things like that. And we want to bring this kind of content to search as well, which, I mean, we have brought this kind of content to search as well through one of the search features. And that's what I work on the search side. But then I also end up contributing to Discover because there's some overlap there.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, so let's get into the questions that I went ahead and prepared. I want to go in chronological order, if that's okay. So let's start with your time in college. Can you talk a little bit about your undergraduate career, anything you might have done at that point, including research, internships, just your general college background?
Yeah, so when I was at UT, I was part of the Turing Scholars program, which is, well, they advertised to be, yeah, sure, a hook'em, right? They advertised to be more research focused. In practice, a lot of people end up getting a lot of value from the honors classes, which are smaller in size, or there's a community. In my case, I did end up doing some research during my time there. I worked with Professor Peter Stone in his robotics lab. I used to work with these really cute football-playing robots made by SoftBank called Now Robots. And we participated in RoboCup. That was probably one of the highlights of my UT career. That was a good time. Apart from that, I was, oh, you've got another person here. I was active in some of the student organizations. I was part of the Turing Scholars student body. And also, I used to help organize events for machine learning and data science, which was organization within the EE department. My favorite part of that organization was helping organize events where we would invite researchers from all different parts of the campus who were doing projects related to machine learning. Sometimes you find that even the English department is working on machine learning related projects nowadays, and they don't have as easy an access to computer science talent. So like making those matches was a fun time. On the internship side, I did end up interning at Google when I was still at UT. And I was working in the search division back then. I found that being proactive about reaching out to companies and not just filling out forms on the website for when you're applying for internships being ended up being really valuable. Like if you if you're really interested in a particular team at some company somewhere, then it really pays to be really sort of take control of your career path and reach out to people and try to join the team of your dreams. So yeah, those are some. Of course, 4 years hard to sum up in a few minutes, but like those are some highlights. Happy to go deeper into any of those parts though.
Yeah, great. By the way, if you haven't checked out UT's robotics lab and you happen to be on campus, for our viewers, go check it out. It's really cool. A lot of cool work they do over there. So yeah, just to expand on your answer a little bit, it seems like you did the internship side, and then you also did some of the research side with your robotics and more machine learning focus over there, right? So what made you decide to immediately after college go into industry rather than pursue a more ML research role?
So there's a few different things. Today, when you're talking about machine learning, that's something that's really widespread, both in industry and outside of industry. In fact, if you're a software engineer in Google, especially on the search side, it's possible you'll never touch machine learning, but it's kind of improbable. Machine learning really powers a lot of the search of today, and I just wrapped up a machine learning project here. So I don't think there's that duality really. Like you can be in industry and work on some really hardcore machine learning stuff. That's one field in computer science I feel that academia and industry are both really pushing. It's not like architecture, which was chiefly industry, or like formal methods, which was chiefly academia. I think this is sort of the combination. But there were still reasons why I ended up going to industry rather than research. And I think those are really more personal reasons. I thought that spending 7 years in academia was a long time for me. And when you're an academic, you really have the potential to make an immense amount of impact. Some of the people I work with, Peter Stone in particular, has had an immense amount of impact driving robotics and computer science as a whole forward. But sometimes when you're a graduate student, that impact can be hard to perceive directly. I mean, of course, there are outliers in every field, but even when you're having impact, sometimes it takes years for your contribution to make its way to people's lives. Which for me was one reason why I wanted to go into industry, where I could really measure my impact on a daily basis. That was one thing for me. And another thing for me personally was, to me, iteration speed matters a lot. So when you're working in something like robotics, I think it's some of the most impressive things you can do. Like, I mean, I could potentially take a date to the robotics lab. It wouldn't be the worst date in the world. But when you're actually working in the lab, the process, the iteration cycle is really long. So think about developing software, right? You write some code, you compile your code, you run your code, you see that it doesn't work. You do this like 5 times or maybe 50 times, and then eventually you have something that works. When I was in the robotics lab, sure, we had some simulations which made things easier. But a lot of times what happened was I would write some code, compile some code, pick up the robot, this like pretty heavy robot manually, bring it closer to my laptop, plug it in, wait for the robot to flail around and fall down, potentially breaking a finger, then like pick it up again. You see what I'm saying, right? So that iteration cycle was hard for me to get used to, but it still let me do some work that I'm proud of.
I see. So just having a short of dev cycle, you think matters because it maybe feels like you're doing more in the same amount of time?
Well, you do end up doing more, right? Because
Yeah,
of the smaller iteration
like
cycle, you
way
do
into
end up doing
yeah,
more. Um,
sure, sure.
so yeah, I think that was something I learned from the lab. I eventually learned small tricks to make things go faster. Um, yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Makes sense. And then the last sort of like, well, maybe not the last, maybe last or second to last. The last sort of college question I have. So, what is one thing that you look back on in your 4 years of college that you are very glad that you did, or that you feel like you got a lot out of, that you would also recommend for maybe current undergraduate students to consider doing?
Um, so I think these are really two questions. I think there are things which I'm really glad I did, but
Hmm.
might not be for everyone. Personally, I feel like when you're part of a community, I think it's good to think about whether and it's really important to get as much as you can from that community. Really try do research and internships and do classes. And I mean, everybody is different, but I think a lot of people would agree on that. But I think it's also nice to try and see if you can contribute back to that community. For me, I think you folks are doing great stuff by organizing this hackathon. That's one way to give back. I ended up doing this by trying to organize corporate events where people will find internships or those sort of research events. I'm really glad I did that, even though probably had almost no effect on my career trajectory. It's just an end in itself. Would I recommend people do that? I think it's like a personal choice. Some people just really want to focus in on research, and I can respect that. But I think thinking about what sort of stuff matters to you, and not always thinking about um, things you do as a path towards something, but rather thinking of them as things in itself, right? Like if you know, maybe you think of it differently, but like I also organized a hackathon when I was in school, and when I was doing that, I was like, well, I could be focusing on my classes, get a better GPA, but the fact that this hackathon happened was and in itself, even if it doesn't affect my career trajectory, that's still something that I can look back on. And I was like, oh, well, that was cool. I'm glad I did that. Yeah.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. That's great advice. Reminds me of why I do stuff like this as well. And I mean, yeah, maybe you don't feel the same way, but I strongly encourage giving back to your community in some sense. Make the world is better off for it. Okay, and then sort of this is like sort of transitioning from college to your full time role. But could you talk a little bit about your full time recruitment process? So what kind of companies that you applied to, and then also in that context, why did you choose to go to Google?
Yeah. I think I was pretty fortunate when it came to full-time opportunities, especially this year. Perhaps I don't know how the situation will be different for some people, but in my case, it was pretty straightforward actually. Going from college to a full-time role. I interned at Facebook my last summer, got a full-time offer, decided that the only other company I would rather work at, apart from Facebook, would be Google. So I had interned at Google before, so getting into the interview stages was straightforward for me. Um, and then just interviewed, went through the usual steps for getting ready, like cracking the coding interview and like a little bit of lead code. Like those are all, no matter what people say about them, those are really good resources and people should make full use of them. So I think I was particularly lucky in my own process. I think the process of finding an internship was still one where um, you need a little bit of both um, just good technical foundation, but then also it really helps to be persistent and um, reach out to companies yourself, especially I'm guessing around this time when opportunities are harder to go by. I think persistence is something that really pays off when you're like proactively reaching out to people, trying to cold call, filling out all the applications, just showing up. I think is really important.
Great, perfect. And just for my own curiosity about that question, so you interned at Google. presumably one summer, and then you skipped the summer, and then you applied full time at Google, right?
Right.
Okay. So did they streamline your interview or anything like that, or did you have to go through the whole process?
They did a little bit. So usually you have 2 phone interviews, then you go on site. You have 4 to 6 on-site interviews, and even before the phone interviews, you have this coding challenge. So for me, they brought me straight on site, and I had my 4 on-site interviews, which were all technical. So I got skipped those 2 phone interviews and that one like coding challenge when I was looking for full time.
Gotcha. So you just went straight to the offsite.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Yeah, that was just my own curiosity speaking. All right. So let's transition over to your current role at Google. Let's see. What question do I got here? Yeah. So you talked a little bit already about your work in search and stuff like that. So what is one thing that you really enjoy about the product, the specific part of Google that you get to work on?
Well, I think of the product I work on as search as a whole, because a lot of times what I find is I'm tinkering with things apart which are outside of strictly my team. And search is probably one of my favorite products in the world. It helps me answer all my questions. So I think it's one of those products where the value proposition is pretty clear. So I like search a lot. The other product, I guess, is Discover, which is the feed inside of the Google app where you see a bunch of articles. I don't have any actual data about like the distribution of content in Discover relative to other products. And if I did, I wouldn't discuss it, of course. But in general, when I look at my own Discover feed, I find that it's maybe more content related to things that I'm personally interested in, like gaming or hiking and things like that. Whereas when I go to Facebook, I see a lot more dumpster fires. So I like that about Discover, but really it's like search as a product, which really makes me want to contribute, and like I just really like the search product in particular.
Yeah, I think it's crazy that you get to work on something that literally everybody uses almost. Like, how nuts is that? Yeah, perfect. Okay, and then this is the last prepared question I have. After this, we'll go into any live questions. But can you talk a little bit about Google's transition to, the remote work for COVID? So how did that affect you? How did the company respond as a whole? And what are your thoughts on the in-person versus virtual work ethic?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I guess on the let me start with something which is maybe not very particular to Google, but something that I have found and a lot of my friends have found is
Sure, perfect.
If you're working on a product team, search, the team I work on is a product team, which means that we have a product manager, we have an actual product that people use. It's not an infrastructure team, right? Like, which is helping internal folks do their job better. Speaking from a product team perspective, there are really 2 phases, there are 2 kinds. Each project has sort of 2 phases. One is product definition, when you're even trying to figure out what you're going to build, right? And there's like an unlimited amount of nuance that you can go into. There's like so much vagueness that people have to sort out. Product managers work super hard to really define what the product is. And that part is really hard to do remotely, because you can't just walk up to somebody and grab coffee with them and have those kinds of informal conversations with people. Now, the other phase is just implementation, right? Like when you're writing just a bunch of code. For that part, I actually feel like work from home has been better for me, because I can focus when there's when it's more quiet. Now, for Google in particular, I think Google was pretty well positioned to do this work from home thing, because everything Google does is on the cloud. we already have G Suite, which helps a lot, and even a lot of the technical infrastructure is on the cloud. So, like yeah, I guess I'll just leave it at that. Like technically, it's been pretty smooth, but I think that human connection is the thing you miss out on. And in fact, even right now, working from home, we end up relying a lot on those connections that we had built before the work from home situation. Like if I'm confused about something, I can reach out to somebody I knew from before coronavirus. And because we have this friendly relationship, I know that they'll help me out. I mean, they would help me out anyway, right? Because it's their job. But like having that human connection is nice, or that rapport is nice. And while work from home has been, I think, relatively successful for me, probably because I don't have kids, I don't know how it would have gone if I was a complete newcomer. If I had to guess, I would say it would have probably gone kind of poorly.
Yeah, that's actually what I was going to ask as a follow-up. I imagine it's hard to, foster those personal connections virtually if you didn't have the advantage of having them going in, right?
We still try. Like we have those social events,
Mhm.
and like we still. I personally still try to reach out to some of the folks who recently joined the team to make sure that they feel
more welcome.
Yeah, but it's still hard when you're working from home.
Yeah, agreed. But that's definitely not just a Google issue. I feel like every company is probably going through that in some sense.
Right.
Okay, perfect. I think that is all actually the questions that I have. If you've just joined, then I'm sorry that you missed most of my questions. But at this point, we will open it up to any questions from our audience members. So if you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask it, or just drop it in our little chat thing over here, and I will ask it for you.
You can also put it in the chat in the meeting itself, I guess. That will also get recorded, though.
Does it like pop up on the recording and say this person asked this question, or?
Probably.
Okay.
Are the internships also being remote during these times? Thanks, Luciana, for that question. Yes, internships are being done remotely. My team in particular doesn't have interns, but I do know that people interning are doing it remotely this time, which is kind of sad. Like interns are always nice to have. And when I was an intern, like being on site and like getting to talk to people and eat free food and things like that was super nice. But yeah, it's being but it's being done remotely this time. Also, do you think there will be less intern positions now? I don't really have any visibility into that. For full-time positions, they have said that they are slowing down hiring, but I haven't heard anything about intern positions. Most of the interns that joined Google do it in the summer, and they were already hired before the coronavirus situation. And to the best of my knowledge, there were no offers which were rescinded. People were still interning. Oh, actually, I do have one intern in my team. But yeah, so that's still happening for next year's internship positions. I haven't heard anything. Yeah, but I probably wouldn't have much visibility into that either way.
Yeah, totally fair. I think most companies currently are just trying to figure out what the hell this year is going to look like.
Yeah.
We'll just have to stay a little flexible. All right. Any other questions?
I had a quick question. You mentioned that the only company you wanted to work for more than Facebook was Google. I was curious why that was.
Yeah. So I think I was looking at it from the perspective of which products I use myself a lot, and which products I enjoy using. I really like the Messenger product from Facebook. It helps me keep connected with people. WhatsApp is amazing. And I'm not to compare the Facebook products and Google products with each other or anything, but I also really like the search product. And that really drew me towards Google. The other thing is when I interned at Google, I got a taste of the engineering culture at Google. Didi, I'm not sure. I think you might have interned there yourself, so you might know. But there's a big culture about good engineering. And there's a lot which goes on before any product is launched. There's a lot of people looking at features that get launched before it goes all the way. There's a big culture around writing down actual documents describing what you're going to change and like all the different ways to do it, alternatives that we could have done, and like people would comment on it all using Google Docs. So I think there's a big culture of doing things right, as opposed to whatever else you might do. But yeah, so that really drew me towards Google as well. And this is not to say anything about Facebook. I think Facebook has a really amazing engineers as well. Probably Google and Facebook have the same caliber of engineers. It's just that the engineering culture was a pretty good fit for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, thanks.
Yeah.
All right, I think we have two questions in the chat as well. One of them, Luciana asks, if you were looking for intern positions right now, how do you think you would go about it?
Yeah, it's definitely a very difficult time to be in, I imagine. I think the data is still waiting to come out about internship positions this time as compared to last time. But I imagine that it's gotten harder, right? But I think the fundamentals are probably similar. You still want to be persistent. Before this time, as I said before, I think it was really important to sort of take control of things and not just rely on career fairs or like these organized events to find your internship or even your full-time job. But I'd say like it's probably even more important right now. So I think it's a good idea to cold call or like cold email people, just people who you respect and are excited to work with. The worst thing that can happen is that they will not reply to your message, in which case it doesn't matter. And the best thing that can happen is that they will actually have you work with them. So that's of course, that doesn't diminish the importance of still having a good technical foundation. You still want to make sure you're studying hard and you know how to developing those technical skills, but just being persistent is important. Unfortunately, it's just one of those times that people would probably study a few years from now, and nobody really knows what's going on. So if you're looking for an internship right now, all the best, and just remember that it's a hard time, and it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Great answer. And then we have one more question in the chat. After this, we'll take at most one more question. So feel free to type that in the chat as well. But Austin asks, do you find that there are technical skills you use often in your job that you wish classes had covered more of?
I think the classes I took, everybody's college experience is different, of course. But I feel like the classes I took actually prepared me quite well for the job. I know this is sort of rare thing for people to say, but I think they maybe over-prepared me for my job. I think one thing people often say is like, I'm working here in my full-time job. I never see myself like writing BFS or DFS or things like that. I have found myself writing those things actually, right? So I think they prepared me pretty well. One thing which some classes that I've been in actually focused on, but most classes I know don't, is style. You have like coding style, writing good code, writing comments. So I think that's really important. So each piece of code that gets written in industry is read at least 2 times, right? it's read by you, the person writing it, and it's read by a reviewer. And in a lot of companies, there's multiple people reviewing your code. And chances are that there will be people later, like even a few years from now, who will be reading your code. So, and it only gets written once. So I think it's important to focus on the reader and make sure you write good code that people can build on and people can understand easily. One class I took actually focused on that a little bit, but most classes focus way more on correctness, which I think is only part of the problem when you're working in a big company. In fact, I've even found that people will be willing to do things which are maybe slightly less efficient in terms of computation, but are way more readable and can be well understood by somebody reading the code. So yeah, focusing on writing good code, clear code, it just makes everybody's life easier.
Yeah, I can comfortably say that has also been my experience. Style is very important, especially, I mean, if you're reading somebody else's code, you want it to be styled well, so you should afford the same courtesy to others. Okay, we will take one more question if anyone has it, and if not, then we will adjourn for the night. Wait like 20 seconds, I guess. I actually wasn't counting, so I'm just going to assume I'm at 10 now. All right, I think we're okay. Well, perfect. Thank you so much for joining us, Harsh. As usual, guys, if you have any questions after the fact, message me, and I will go ahead and message Harsh and ask them for you. But with that, everybody have a great night. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for inviting me on.